Do you guys remember that debacle wreck? Well, Demonic Enzymes sort of took that entire video and trashed it, but luckily for us, there's another version that's totally not a ripoff of Wreck. In fact, it's so different, it even has a much more feasible origin for disease. In the events of the movie Quarantine, much like Wreck in literally every single way, in fact, even the attic door comes swinging down and scares everybody, a journalist and cameraman are shadowing firefighters and EMTs for a ride along to get a good feel for the average everyday life of what happens at the fire department. Unfortunately for them, they should have probably just decided to do this another day. During the events of The Shadow, they get a call late in the night to respond to an old woman screaming in her apartment. Upon entering, they find the old woman has something severely wrong with her and isn't responding to commands and seems to just have a general confusion before turning violently aggressive, which then kicks off a night of everyone in the building dropping and becoming highly aggressive monsters that are borderline animals attacking their fellow tenants. So in today's episode, it will probably feel somewhat familiar. If you haven't seen the Wreck video, then don't go see it. Just pretend like it doesn't exist, because this time we are covering something a little more corporeal. The Doomsday Cult virus from the movie Quarantine 1 and 2, and how it affects the body, and why hilariously the guy who brought this upon humanity is an idiot, because he seemingly doesn't understand the immune system, but also doesn't really understand viral mutations. So as per usual, up on screen you'll find a jump to point to bypass the summaries of these movies and then head straight into the science. I'm also going to do something extra crazy, actually separate Quarantine 1 and 2 in the chapters. Exciting, isn't it? I had someone get upset in the comments in the last movie I covered saying I was explaining the summaries too much, so also let me know what y'all think about that too. Basically my thinking on it is, I kind of just show you the movie without showing you the entire thing, and I figure maybe 3 hours of movie breakdown in 16 minutes is pretty good, but that's just my opinion on it, so let me know what you think about that. So let's get into why, if you plan on dropping a virus on a planet, you need to actually make sure you have an exit strategy or at least a way to counter said virus. We kick off our story with Angela trying to make a viral video about the daily life of firefighters. Little does she know, a viral video will be absolutely what she's capturing. As she interviews all the other firefighters, as someone who's done Third Rider, which is basically I rode along with ambulances and helped out with that stuff back when I was in EMT school, these guys have way too much time on their hands. Like, not IRL, but in this movie. And like, I was in a small county where I did mine, and about every 10 minutes we were heading out to a call. Imagine in New York, these guys show up and boom, they are working the whole day. But moving on, we meet one of our firefighters, Jake. As he continues to show Angela around, there's the standard ribbing one another, showing her the poles they slide down and the tools that were used, as well as the Dalmatian. Pretty standard stuff, and as time gets later on, firefighters go to sleep for the night, which does occasionally happen, but a call rings out and Jake mentions how it looks like Angela got her call. They load up and then head out to the apartment. Arriving at the apartments, they find the cops are already there too. An old man awaits them and then tells them what's happening. He mentions how there was a scream from the woman's room and it didn't even sound human. Other tenants have gathered in the atrium to see what's going on, as then they head up to the woman's room. They bust open the door to Miss Espinosa's apartment and then find her standing at the other end. A dog runs out barking as the woman continues shaking. As they question if she's hurt or okay, she moves into the light and there is blood on her shirt and she's foaming at the mouth. Cameraman then turns on his light to the camera, which frightens her and turns her aggressive. She then begins attacking the firefighters and bites into the neck of one of the cops. As they subdue her, they pull the cop downstairs, but as they are trying to extract him from the building, they find the doors are locked and they've been trapped inside. At this point, they're officially in quarantine. As the cop radios to everyone outside, his radio seems to have been jammed and nobody can get in contact with anybody on the outside. As they begin kind of freaking out and discussing what to do with the cop, one of the firefighters is then thrown from the floor above and lands on his chest and immediately begins bleeding out. He is still technically alive, but that is some serious brain bleed at this point. Jumping forward, Angela then heads upstairs with Scott, the cameraman, and heads back to the old woman's room. As they do, another woman who was in there was trying to run out, but then is pushed and knocked unconscious. Scott turns on his light and finds that Miss Espinosa is back up, except this time she's covered in blood from attacking the cop. As the other cop tries to talk to her, she charges and he's forced to put her down. And this freaks out the cop, as it likely would, and Jake attempts to calm him down. At this point, the firefighters go around and start trying to get everyone out of their rooms, and honestly, I don't know if that's a good idea. A few of the tenants already look sick. As Jake gets to the last door, he finds one woman sitting in the dark, looking at a static TV screen, breathing heavily. They get her up, and as they do, she immediately begins vomiting. Further in the room, a rat is seen, and Scott has to stomp on it as it was running straight at him, which is a fairly strange thing for rats to do. Meanwhile, the tenants were able to find the right key to get the textile shop open, but as they move into the area, lights are turned on the outside as soldiers in biohazard gear have force multipliers raised, telling them to stay back. They put metal grates up over the window to keep everyone in and inform them that they need to stay in there until they can send in help. At this point, everyone in the atrium isn't able to call call or really get anyone on the phone as a local jammer has been placed nearby. Jake mentions that this quarantine is in response to a threat which could be biological or nuclear in nature, which is actually more common than you think, which is actually true. Life is pretty horrifying. Most people are just oblivious to it. As they continue to try to find a way out, they head out to a window and are immediately blocked off by more soldiers, who then put plastic over the windows to contain whatever is spreading inside. As a vet inspects the firefighter and cop in the textile shop area, they're both looking incredibly rough. Bleeding out, broken bones, foaming at the mouth. The vet mentions how he has never seen anything like this before. He says that he doesn't understand how an old lady could do this to two grown men. At this point, Angela goes around interviewing people, not important, but what is important is player 2's entered the game. George, the guy who fell and currently doesn't even have a connected tibia and fibula, is up and walking around, which looks incredibly painful. As he slowly walks towards everyone, they see that he's foaming at the mouth and begins growling at everyone who comes close. They give him a sedative to knock him out so he doesn't damage himself further, which works for a moment. But at this point, the vet seems to know what is happening. Based on the symptoms that everyone is displaying, aggression, sensitivity to light, foaming at the mouth, he suspects it's rabies. He's confused though, as rabies usually takes days to manifest, but this is only taking hours, meaning that it must be a mutated form. The issue is, with standard rabies, if you don't have symptoms yet, you can cure it. Once you display symptoms, it's too late and it's 100% fatal. So if you ever get bit by something, go to the doctor immediately to rule out rabies. And also, you need the thing that bit you, otherwise they have to preemptively give you like 7 shots in your stomach, if I remember correctly. It's incredibly painful. Back in the atrium, a lawyer attempts to go back to his apartment but is stopped by the cops. He has the right idea, separate from others, and eventually he says that he's going to sue the cop as he boards an elevator. Angela at this point goes with 2 others around to the back area, to the back stairs, to see what's going on, and the dog from earlier is in the hallway. It's clear that the dog has gone completely rabid at this point and is barking at them, but before it can attack, the elevator doors open up and the lawyer is immediately attacked as the dog jumps inside and begins snacking on the man-witch. So from here, basically everything starts going sideways for everyone. As they leave the lawyer to his fate, they then head into the couple's apartment, where they are able to pick up a TV broadcast with a chief saying that everyone inside the building has been evacuated, which is a lie. They then shut off the power. As they hear someone breathing, the woman who was sitting watching static TV from earlier has found them and begins attacking. Scott is forced to use his camera to bash in her face to protect himself and the group. So finally, the cop gathers everyone up and then mentions how the CDC is here. Oh, thank God, send in the nerds. The vet protests, saying that how could they possibly have a cure for this? They don't even know what it is. As they discuss where everyone lives, the cop then asks who was in the attic, and they say a man from Boston, but nobody's seen him in months, which is probably a good sign. And now the CDC is coming in, and they gave these nerds force multipliers. As men in biohazard suits move in, they move to the textile room to inspect those who are infected. They then go and extract some brain tissue from George, but after they remove some, he sits up and immediately attacks one of the CDC personnel. Only one of the personnel actually manages to escape. As they demand information from him as to what's happening, he says that they first noticed this at the vet. A dog arrived, and within an hour, all the other animals had been infected with a rabies-like infection. They traced the dog back to this apartment complex, and it turns out to be the little girl's dog, Max. Now the issue is, the little girl has been sick for what the mom says was weeks, but it's just bronchitis. As the attempts to assuage everyone's fears are made, they then turn on the light to the camera, and the little girl shows sensitivity to it. The little girl then bites into the mom's neck as she is straight up infected. As they move upstairs to track the little girl, they end up passing by the old lady's apartment from earlier, the one that got. Well, now she's no longer got and is back up, mobile, and missing. And that's why you double tap, ladies and gentlemen. As they search the apartment, the little girl then jumps onto the cop, biting him, ensuring that he's now infected. Then the old woman comes out of the darkness, but gets smacked down by Jake, who has an axe. As they leave, everyone is running upstairs as 2 people stay behind to try to close the textile shop door as the infected are trying to get through. Realizing it's a fruitless endeavor, they say screw it and then run, and the girl's mom, who was cuffed to the stair banister, is immediately bitten by the infected as she can't go anywhere. That was some great thinking ahead, Mr. Officer. Basically now it's just a complete free-for-all. Tons of people are getting bitten, and most of the tenants at this point are infected and turned with just a small group of survivors. In a small room that they were able to close the door to, they find the CDC personnel with them has been bitten, but so has the other girl in the room as she has bitten off her fingers. So yeah, that's not normal. This sends the other tenant into a freak out as then he cuts the plastic and tries to escape, and then is immediately domed by a sniper on the other building. The sniper then keeps taking pot shots, keeping them inside of the room. The old man in the other room mentions how there may be a way out as there's a drain in the basement, but before he can tell them how to get there, the CDC personnel changes and attacks the old man. The woman then changes, and then they bolt and shut the door. Now it's just Scott, Jake, and Angela. As they try to make their way out, basically the whole building is now infected. Jake goes ham on like 12 different people, which was pretty much just like awesome. Talk about like just play some Doom music over that. that. And then they get into a room and eventually find the keys to the basement. As they open the door to leave the area, Jake is then dropped as he's overwhelmed, leaving just Scott and Angela, who's freaking out about staying in the light. Bro, the light ain't gonna help when it's just super rabies breaking out everywhere. They're forced up into the attic, however, as the stairs are completely infested. In the attic, they find rat cages everywhere with rodents and experimental equipment. Moving through, they realize it's a lab of some sort, and it has newspaper clippings about a doomsday cult all over the walls. As they walk through, Angela won't shut up about staying in the light. I guess it's just adrenaline overload. And they find a tape recorder, but they have no idea what it says as it's been damaged. But eventually they realize someone is up there with them in the attic of the attic. Scott goes to take a look and then finds that something is up there as it attacks his camera. He has to turn on the night vision as the flashlight was broken in the altercation. As he looks around, he spots this thing in there with them. It attacks him, taking him out in the process. And considering this thing looks like it's starving, it immediately begins to eat him, leaving just Angela. As she sees it, it attacks her and knocks her down, and then drags her off to become a snack as well. And honestly, probably should have just barricaded an apartment room, and that would have made way more sense to me. I mean, that would be my plan. Just barricade the crap out of a door and just stomp any rat that comes by. So while all this crap is going on, this brings us into the events of Quarantine 2, Viral Boogaloo. So concurrently with the outbreak in Los Angeles apartment complex, whatever, we start our story with two women in the back of a taxi, and from the looks of it, probably a fake taxi, based on the fact that they're dressing in the taxi. I mean, I'm just not understanding. Was it a surprise that the plane was taking off that night? Usually they get a heads up about that. Anyhow, as they head to the terminal, Jenny and Paula board the plane and they end up running across one of the pilots who already looks sick. He says he must have gotten it from his dogs, who's also sick, as all the other dogs in the neighborhood are sick as well. Jenny is then tasked with keeping an eye on a teenager named George as he is traveling alone. As they fill up the plane, an elderly couple gets on. The husband has Parkinson's and doesn't really move nor speak due to the effects it's had on his nervous system. And a large man gets on the plane as well, who's going to be patient zero. As the plane gets ready to take off, Mr. Handsome over here is attempting to put his hamsters in the overhead bin. The bigger guy named Ralph goes over to help, but then is bit on the finger by one of the hamsters in the cage. Anyways, from here, just the run-of-the-mill group of people who you're gonna meet are just gonna meet a horrible end. Just prior to taking off, it's an important note, Ralph is already beginning to show signs that something is up with his vision. As the plane continues flying, there are several discrepancies. First, who are these two making out in the plane? Like, what is that about? Second, they say they have Wi-Fi, and have you ever used a plane's Wi-Fi? Why do they even offer it? I've never been able to get to function. And possibly the most unbelievable thing about this is the dude is having a full-on conversation on his phone when they're in the sky. Also not really feasible. Just thought I would bring that up for a second. So moving on. So at this point, Jenny and Henry start hitting it off, and there's an unusual amount of animals on this plane as well, with an older woman mentioning that the cat she has is usually pretty well behaved and never leaves the apartment building. I wonder which apartment complex she belongs to. Also, the pilot continues to show degrading symptoms as they continue to fly. As Jenny goes to check on Ralph in the back, he's looking pretty rough. He mentions that he needs some water or at least something to drink and is seeming quite disoriented. As Jenny moves back to check on Henry, he's watching a live stream of the apartment complex from the first quarantine, currently undergoing many issues. Jenny then heads to the back of the plane again to check on Ralph, who is slumped over, and then turns, showing that he is foaming at the mouth. He vomits on her and begins talking about stopping the plane as he needs to be let off. The cat also eats the vomit, scavengers, you know, and as Jenny cleans off the puke, Ralph runs to the cockpit and begins slamming on the door to be let in. A few passengers are able to subdue Ralph, with George possibly getting a concussion. Paula then zip ties Ralph's hand behind him. Jenny then puts in an emergency call so that they can make an emergency landing. The pilots now start the emergency landing, but they are doing so during some difficult weather, and as such are hit with severe turbulence, which is literally my nightmare scenario, but they are successful in landing. Upon landing though, they are not given a gate at which to go to. So while doing that, Paula is then bitten in the face by Ralph, who wakes back up, infecting her. They end up putting Ralph in the bathroom and closing the door, trapping him. Luckily, there is a medic on board, so they're able to sedate Paula before it gets any worse. As the pilots attempt to get to a gate, they end up just taking one and exiting the plane. Pilots stay behind to keep Ralph in the plane contained. As they head to the door, it is locked and they aren't able to get out to the terminal. They then open another door to the baggage area to get to the main terminal. Then as they move through the staging area, it becomes quickly apparent that they are trapped in there. All the doors have been sealed and now they can't escape. They're basically just completely locked down. Everyone is predictably freaking out at this point as they argue. George then looks outside to see that they're completely surrounded. They're given orders to stay in there and not to escape. They are now under quarantine too. So they start yelling at Jenny like she has any idea what's going on, which is bizarre, and they realize they need a med kit for Paula as she's bleeding out. So a few are sent up back to the plane's cargo hold to retrieve it. As they walk up, the power is cut, leaving everyone in the dark. Heading back into the plane, they find that both the pilots are gone and Ralph is nowhere to be found inside the bathroom, but it is covered in blood. As they begin cutting the carpet to get in the cargo hold, they find the man with Parkinson. He looks down at the broken zip ties as Ralph is now on the loose completely. As the group enters the cargo hold, the lab rats that were were supposedly just hamsters have now been let loose in there. Ed takes it out as Jenny grabs the med kit. As they ascend out of the cargo hold, she sees one of the pilots at the end of the plane, kind of like skittering around, creepy as hell. But behind her is the other newly infected pilot as it grabs her. Luckily, Niall is packing some heat and then takes that pilot out. Meanwhile, as they attempt to get out, the man with Parkinson's wife is trying to escape out the door and appears to be panicking. As they try to get her to kind of calm down, she turns around and begins attacking the group in a rage. They are able to shut the door and keep her out, but just barely. George begins talking to Jenny about how her dad just called, but all the phones went dead at the same time, meaning that they're basically now being jammed as well. As Jenny looks around for a potential way out, she ends up finding that there is some blood splatter, meaning that they are not alone in there now. Jenny says that whatever is spreading through bites, but the medic says that she disagrees as they don't know how it's spreading. Meanwhile, the man with Parkinson's is totally boned. He sees one of the rats but can't call for help or move really, and it ends up biting his head, infecting him, and then they capture the rat. For their safety, they end up putting Doc in a cargo box and chaining it up so that he can't escape. The group then decides that they need to figure out what was in the plane's cargo hold. As they inspect it, this rat was the same one they saw inside the cargo hold. George begins throwing shade at Henry, saying that he knows that he brought lab rats on the plane instead of just hamsters. Henry is able to convince Jenny, though, that the lab rats were actually just regular South American hamsters and they have tails. George says at this point that basically Jenny needs to stop thinking with the brain downstairs and that she would believe him if she didn't like Henry. My boy George, he kind of knows what's up. As Henry and George talk away from the group, she looks up and spots our old buddy Ralph. He runs down the conveyor belt and begins to attack. Luckily, Ed is able to get to them and then wraps a wire around his neck and takes him out, ending Ralph before he can do any more rampage and attack anyone. At this point, they get a call over the radio saying that the CDC is coming in. Oh, thank God, the nerds with more force multipliers are here, and this time they brought a container with them. They take Niall's force multiplier and then grab the rat's body. They begin picking people and intend to inject everyone with something they call a protocol, saying they can't leave unless they take this protocol. The old lady obliges to take the protocol, but as she goes to get her injection, the cat has now turned and bites the lady's neck. Bad kitty. They fire on it, and as they do, they activate the almonds of Doc with Parkinson's, who is now able to get up and then bites the neck of the CDC personnel. The others at this point start freaking out. Not realizing that they are expendable, they then run outside, and the couple who couldn't keep it together for a 3-hour flight has her boyfriend abandon her and follows the CDC personnel outside. As they go out, they're lit up like the 4th of July as cowardice is punished. They manage to drag one of the CDC personnel in who's only slightly injured, and they all run to a truck. As they get in, Niall says that he loves his wife and quickly begins to turn as he was bitten previously, but he kisses his wife. I'm sure that won't be a problem. As they shut the door, they all hang out in the trailer. Jenny says that they will send more help as they have the protocol. Shiloh, the medic, fires back saying that there is no protocol. Those were different medicines for different diseases. All of them were different colors, different vials. They were basically just injecting them with anything they could to see what sticks, making them the guinea pigs for stopping this outbreak. Henry points the force multiplier asking what the CDC knows, but he mentions how it's really not the CDC, but the CDBT, basically counter-terror stuff. Henry seems real interested, doesn't he? He mentions how one of his units was at the apartment complex. They found one survivor, if you can call him that, and goes on to mention how everything they gave them to counter the disease made it worse, not better. Animals carried it first, but it spread to humans ultimately. They have no idea how to stop it, cure it, and their only option was containment. The CMBT then kind of just domes himself, as presumably he wanted out or he knew this thing was gonna go real bad real quick. As they discuss escape, Ed then talks to them about a tunnel. As he puts out his arm though to basically motion where to go, the pilot reaches down and grabs his arm. As they lift the container, they're able to crush the pilot before Ed can be bit. Honestly, at this point, I think it might just be better to stay put. That's kind of what I would do, but the group decides to throw deuces, which actually turns out to be the correct choice, meaning that I would have probably definitely bit the dust during this movie. As they walk along the conveyor belt, Henry then goes AWOL to go get more ammo. As he lock and loads Brides of Christ, they run into Paula, who is fully transformed now. She attacks Jenny, who's able to then knock her off the ledge into her doom, and they eventually enter an office area where they attempt to find the blueprints for the staging area to find this tunnel. George ends up finding Henry's case in it, proof that whatever is happening, Henry is linked to. As they find the blueprints, Niall and his wife both jump into the office area because you probably shouldn't have kissed her, Niall, but Henry is able to take them both out. Henry at this point was also bitten. George reminds him that he will be okay though because of the injections that he has, and Henry realizes the jig is up, the news is out, they finally found him. Henry says something that, look, I mean, technically he's right, but he's not right the right way. Basically, there are too many of us. We are growing out of control population-wise and using more and more juice on a burning planet. I mean, the reality is, yeah, we are. We really need to stop hooking up so much. Anyways, Ed goes for the force multiplier and gets got because of it, and then the rest of the group is put up against the wall. Jenny asks how he got that stuff through security, and it turns out that the Doomsday Cult is far more reaching than originally thought. Security was in on it. Henry then injects the vaccine into his eye to stave off succumbing to his bite. Jenny mentions how clearly that didn't work in his apartment complex, so obviously that's not a good thing. He then grabs George and takes off. As Jenny goes off to look for George and Henry, Preston, who was infected a while ago, begins chasing after Jenny. She was able to escape before finally crushing his head with, I don't even know what that thing is, honestly. It's just a big metal thing. Okay, so then this like weird thing happens with Nika. She was infected, sure, but she does this thing where she's like smelling the air and then bends over backwards and makes like this weird cooing noise. I don't know why she did this. No others exhibited these symptoms, so I'm guessing it's probably just to be creepy. Meanwhile, Shyla runs back into Jenny and then sacrifices herself to the infected as she's already been bitten. She's basically torn apart as Jenny enters the darker corridors, having received thermal vision goggles from Shyla. She follows the blood trail, where then she finds the mice are all over the place back there, and as she continues through, she eventually finds George sitting in a hole as he says Henry's cure didn't work. She looks up and finds that Henry has changed, but because of his cure, he now has inflamed the right eye and face area, weakening the integrity of the skull presumably, as well as the tissue. George opens up on Henry to get him off of Jenny, and then she smashes his face with a wrench, taking him out. As Jenny and George are the last two, apparently the whole terminal was just missiled. They're both able to get into the drain and begin making their way out of the airport. Jenny then gives the thermal goggles to George as they crawl along. The further they go, the more aggressive Jenny starts becoming and breathing heavily. He then looks back to see that she has actually been bitten and is changing quickly. As he exits the pipe, he looks back to see that she is fully transformed, meaning this bite now only takes minutes. He looks out over Las Vegas, assumedly now the new outbreak area, which I mean, just nuke Las Vegas, I guess. So the first thing to understand about quarantine is that it is not some ridiculous demonic enzyme that makes no sense. Instead, it is simply a mostly zoonotic infection that is able to be manipulated in a way that becomes highly infectious, but also highly mutagenic as a result of the Doomsday Cult tampering with the actual viruses. So, to explain how this disease progresses and may in fact cause the aggressive nature exhibited in those infected, we must first talk about the virus and how it's able to jump species from animals into humans, because it's actually not as easy as you'd might imagine. It's very difficult for viruses to jump species. There are many questions in this order that will dictate whether a virus is able to infect a host from animal to human and vice versa. First, does the original host animal carry the virus? Second, does the original host shed the virus? Third, to what extent are humans exposed to the original host? Fourth, can the virus infect humans? Fifth, how well does it replicate in humans? And sixth, how effectively do humans spread the virus? Given what we know about the Quarantine movie and the vet's hypothesis on what the virus is that we are dealing with, the general running idea is that we are dealing with rabies, which in all actuality is a pretty good platform to go on concerning potential world-ending events, as it satiates all but one of the questions as far as how it is able to propagate in our species. The original host carries the virus, such as with rodents who they are working on, which in turn is able to infect dogs in the apartment complex through bites, and also just straight up biting humans as well, which checks off the first question. The original host will shed the virus as rabies is shed through the salivary glands as it moves from the brain to the saliva, which is transmitted through bites, which takes care of the second question. Humans would be exposed to the host readily because we are a species that bonds with other animals quite readily due to our social structures. Any dog that is infected would quite easily come into contact with their human family, much like how Max came into contact with Fiona, which checks off the third question. The virus can in fact infect humans. The rabies virus is capable of infecting mammals with fur quite readily in its natural form, so any altered form of the virus would maintain that base, which gives us a check for the fourth question. The virus at first seems to replicate slowly in humans at a much more normal level, which may take a few days to manifest symptoms. As the virus becomes more familiar, which we will cover in a moment with the human anatomy, it is able to replicate faster and faster, which kind of lends credence to the possibility of it moving around the body by some alternative method so that it satiates question 5. But then we kind of come to the crux of the issue for the Doomsday Cult. Question 6. How effectively does it spread from human to human? Well, to answer this, the reality is it doesn't spread all that well. When an animal is infected with the rabies virus, at the end of the day, they are an animal and can only take what they have operating between their ears to go from there. We know rabies induces a whole host of symptoms in the host as it begins to affect the brain and cellular communication, which we will definitely be covering why humans become so aggressive so quickly. But the issue is animals, they aren't exactly that smart. When an animal is scared, it will bite. That's its typical go-to when defending itself or going into offensive measures to ensure its own safety, or even hunting. Considering rabies is known to cause hallucinations as well, this only works in conjunction with the already rising aggression levels to make them lash out and bite at things that may or may not be there. And this is exactly what the rabies virus wants, as it's transmitted through bites because of infected saliva. With humans though, this is not the case. Our typical go-to is not to bite. I mean, sure, children will do it, Mike Tyson will do it, but think about any fight you've ever been in or seen. Was anyone biting the other person? Likely not, unless it was a last resort, because humans' teeth aren't really used for defensive or offensive reasons. We use our hands, we scratch, we elbow, we kick. Humans are really more about blunt force than sharp force. And the reason for all that is because as we evolved over time, our brains got bigger and we learned how to use tools rather than what nature gave us. Because of this, things like biting in fights do not come naturally. Another issue is with regular rabies, we can still somewhat control ourselves even to the bitter end. While things like hydrophobia will likely occur during the later stages along with anxiety, tremors, and agitation, the fact is even with rabies affecting cellular communication within our brain, there's not really a point where someone may lose complete control and then start attacking doctors and others. In fact, look up medical footage. People who are in extreme late stages are still communicating, moving, and around people with very little issue, and this is due to the brain still having control over our meat suit. Because of this, the virus is not all that capable of spreading within the human population, and instead, once you are infected, odds are it will live and expire with you alone. Animals are typically responsible for humans contracting this disease and propagating this disease in the wild. So the sixth question is completely not satiated, meaning that this virus would be a flop. It would never attain this level, at least in its natural form. It just wouldn't be possible for the standard variant of rabies to attain such virulent ability, which is exactly why Mr. Handsome here was in his lab developing a more virulent and potent form of this rabies. And to do this, it would require overriding the natural abilities of the human mind to still operate in an altered state. So the question is, how might they have been able to do this? Well, to me, it's pretty clear that if you take how rabies typically operates, you would need it to really become more than what it is. So to understand this, let's talk about what rabies actually does to your meat suit when it infects you and how the Doomsday Cult virus differs from this, which explains the alterations made to it. When you are bitten, the virus enters the broken skin and then is seeded via the saliva. Whereas most viruses will infect the nervous system only accidentally if the immune system fails to combat it to the point that it is suppressed, the rabies virus is actively attacking the nervous system. Upon entering the muscles via a bite, it will then migrate towards the end of the motor neurons. From here, it begins a slow crawl towards the central nervous system. It will use things like active transport from the neurons themselves and the neural tracts by using the axon's long fibers to kind of continue on up to the central nervous system. While in the peripheral nervous system, rabies can be stopped with a series of shots that are capable of saving your life, but if you aren't quick enough, you will drop no matter what they do if you start showing symptoms. Speaking of symptoms, once the infection reaches the central nervous system, such as the spinal cord, brainstem, and brain itself, the jig is up. At this point, it is 100% lethal. Do not pass go, do not collect $200, which is what makes it important that if you are bit, seek treatment immediately. Once it gets to the brain, typically this is when aggression is seen, along with a host of other symptoms. There are technically two types of rabies: aggressive rabies and dumb rabies. Aggressive rabies is typically what you think of when you imagine Cujo. Aggressive. Dumb rabies is when an animal almost acts drunk, out of character, and will completely lose fear of other animals, including humans. Now, they will still bite you, so don't take them as friendly. Now, this is linked to kind of a few reasons why the brain might react this way. First, it's pretty clear that the animal is out of character. Brain inflammation is pretty standard when rabies actually enters the brain. Because of this, things like meningitis can begin to form, which can cause brain damage, as your body really doesn't have too much of an ability to stop the disease from progressing. This will also lead to things like malaise, difficulty concentrating, speaking, thinking, drinking water. Basically, viral meningitis accompanied with actual encephalopathy is nothing to be taken lightly. But even with all these, there are still other aspects of rabies that we have only just recently figured out. And even with pressure on the brain, these symptoms such as aggression are strange to say the least. So the question now is, what have we found that might explain kind of everything going on, and how might this actually tie into the movie Quarantine, which may have been what the doctors were going for? Well, recently, Dr. Karsten Hufer looked back at studies conducted in the 1980s and 1990s where they found that the molecules of the virus combine to nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, which respond to the neurotransmitter acetylcholine, which affects muscle control. So concerning muscle control, we know the vet had a hard time believing the old lady could take out 2 full-grown men in that way, but with the receptors being influenced, think of it like burning a candle at 3 ends as opposed to 1. Even though she was elderly and female, the acquisition of more muscle usage and overriding the mind's natural propensity to protect the body from damage means that the old lady was operating well beyond the capacity of a normal person, likely to her own detriment. If you didn't know, humans typically only use about 1/3 of the strength that we are capable of, and this is to protect from muscle tears and damage to the body. With these receptors influenced heavily, this allows for the old lady and even children to almost overpower a normal adult. So an adult male would almost be impossible for an average person to overcome strength-wise. The findings also suggested that the other receptors in the brain were being affected via glycoproteins created by the virus as well. These proteins would essentially hang out in between the neurons of the brain and affect the brain and how it communicates with the cell next to it on a cellular level. When the glycoproteins were injected into the brains of mice, they found that the mice became extremely agitated despite the fact that they were not infected with rabies, but by the viral creation within the body. And that is the whole point of this rambling I have gone on. Typically with, say, a zombie virus, the idea is a fast replicating virus that moves faster than normal through the body and is able to overtake the brain. But in the case of rabies, it appears that while the virus is responsible for the expiration of the host, the glycoproteins produced along with brain swelling are what causes the agitation and behavioral changes. There's also another aspect to the viruses that does fall in line pretty well concerning what we see in Quarantine 1 and Quarantine 2, and this is the speed at which it infects each subsequent generation. When a virus was first dropped, such as with the pilot who was sick and then went to work, or the little girl who has apparently been sick for a while, at first the rabies virus progresses quite normally through the body concerning time constraints. But as the virus moves from human to human as opposed from animal to human, its mechanisms become more familiar with the human body and it adopts a better ability to infect. Each generation creates a new variant of the virus, which would suggest a highly immunogenic ability of the virus and adoption of amino acids to aid in infecting the most prevalent host, which is humans. All this becomes faster, thus making the virus highly successful. This mutagenic ability also seems to explain how it is able to infect so effectively. Rabies will not enter the blood, and because as mentioned previously, it is a neuron-driven disease. But due to the tampering by the Doomsday Cult, I would go on a limb to say that there are 2 possibilities now. It could be either or both, really. The first possibility is that the virus is now a bloodborne disease, or at minimum has the ability to enter the blood of a person and will still infect neurons of this person as well. If we take a look at the blood vessels in the eyes, upon their infection, we can see that they are bulging, indicating that the blood vessels may be directly under attack from the virus. And this bloodborne ability would also have the added benefit of greatly decreasing the incubation time. Rather than having to slowly move up the neurons, which may take days, it can circulate through the body quickly and bypass the blood-brain barrier, entering the brain quickly. The second possibility is that the virus itself is still a neuron-based disease and will still take some time to actually make its way up the central nervous system, but the virus is releasing a form of glycoprotein into the bloodstream. This glycoprotein may have the ability to still wreak havoc on the body. As the immune system is activated, it will become quite aware that something is in the blood that shouldn't be there, and an all-out war is launched in the bloodstream, which would cause blood vessel damage, which again would account for the red eyes that we see. Now, I am partial to the first option over the second because of how the body reacts once infected. We see really that the incubation time decreases rapidly as more and more are infected, almost to the point of it being minutes as seen with Jenny. And this mutagenic rate may also be confirmed as when Henry uses his countermeasure, which may have worked as like a bite from a mouse to a human, it now completely fails when it's human to human bite, as likely the virus has mutated beyond the control of his medicines, which basically means that his group has really just screwed humanity. It didn't just create a good plague. But the final thing I wanted to talk about is, what does this virus do to the brain of a person? Well, again, as incubation time decreases, we see the symptoms coming on stronger and quicker than the previous person that was infected. After the hypothesized entering of the bloodstream, it would quickly work its way into the cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF, as well as the brain itself. Now, I imagine the CSF would be entered first as the person quickly begins having physical symptoms. With Jenny, minutes after her infection, she begins breathing quickly and heavily, almost hyperventilating, and likely this isn't really a result of low oxygen levels, but actually difficulty with her brainstem communicating to other brain cells. The brainstem is responsible for a lot of autonomic functions, as you you know, and one of those is breathing rate. As the infection takes hold, the first thing it begins to influence is how quickly you are breathing, likely making you feel like you are suffocating, but you aren't. As the infection takes further hold of your mind, anxiety and panic would continue to add on to that breathing rate as it becomes more shallow and rapid. With others, this was slower, but ultimately it doesn't matter who you are. This will then lead to you salivating as the virus moves into the salivary glands and begins forcing an overproduction of this saliva, shedding the virus via your mouth. Minutes later, as the glycoprotein begins to settle in between the neurons by the virus, moving past the blood-brain barrier, your aggression levels would increase as the brain begins thinking less and less logically. Now, typically with rabies, you still have control. You are in control, but you're not really in control of like your muscular movements. But with the absolute saturation of the 3-pound anxiety-ridden chemoelectric meat machine in our skulls, they would likely shut down the frontal lobe in any real capacity, leaving only aggression, fear, and instincts, and the programming by the virus. And this would lead you to quickly turn on friends and family, as your brain literally doesn't remember them anymore. Hell, you may even be just straight up hallucinating the whole time, and you think that they are the monsters, and you are using everything you got to stop them, even down to biting. However, the virus isn't sustainable at these levels. Considering the progression of the disease and how quickly it can envelop your mind, hydrophobia is likely to set in extremely quickly. Because of this, leaking from your face and increased aggression levels, your body would be depleted extremely quickly. If you could outlast a horde for a few days, they would end up just dropping due to exposure and dehydration, even faster in warmer, drier climates. And this means that while the virus is extremely virulent, ultimately it would burn itself out because it's just too powerful. So again, why not nuke Las Vegas and just be done with it?